All right, so talking about introductions. So, one thing you may have noticed in having graded your essays thus far for an honors English class preparing for AP is that introductions really don't matter that much. In life, they do. If you're trying to write for any real reason, you want some sort of introduction. But for the AP exam, introductions aren't that important. What's the main focus is certainly your thesis statements and your body paragraphs. Notice, your thesis statement is a point. Your body paragraphs can get up to the 4 points, which could get you all the way up to a 5. But introductions are good for the sophistication point. There are several ways you can earn the sophistication point. There are 3 bullets here, but this one's kind of a combination of 2 different bullets. And I will say that this last bullet and the which again is a combination is really where an introduction will be integral if you want to get the point for one of these 2 things. So the other 2 we will talk about on different days, and maybe this one bullet point is not for you. Maybe you would do better to stretch for one of these. And that's fine. Like I said, we'll talk about it. But today let's talk about this one and trying to get the sophistication point for this. Again, with both of these things right here, an introduction will be necessary. A good introduction will be necessary. It won't hurt on these either. But so looking at these 2 points, first, using relevant analogies to help an audience better understand an interpretation. This is the one I'm actually going to be focusing on today. But secondly, utilizing a prose style that is especially vivid, persuasive, convincing, or appropriate to a student's argument. So this last part after the slash here is really about good writing, like beautiful writing, interesting writing, effective writing. And a good introduction is going to be important to that. So let's talk about introductions a little bit and then focus in on a strategy where you can kind of include an analogy within your introduction to help with this, but also use an analogy throughout your paper that could boost your writing style. So that's what we will focus on. But to get to that, let's get to what we already know about introductions. So this document right here is something that I use with my students, not this document itself, but I like to go through with students and have them tell me what are some things you've learned about introductions in the past. So here is a list that one of my classes came up with recently. So it has to have a thesis and a theme. It has to have a captivating statement, a hook, which could be like a rhetorical question or attention grabber. You can look through that list. These are all the things that we hear about doing introductions. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with any of these things. In fact, you might be able to incorporate them into a more advanced introduction. The problem, though, sometimes is that these are some things you've learned since elementary school, and therefore sometimes they can sound kind of elementary. The focus, I would say, of high school, especially in honors, is to kind of start getting away from our work looking like schoolwork, even though obviously it still is, and move towards our work looking like professional academic work. That's kind of the idea of college and therefore the idea of AP. So we're kind of going to stretch in that direction. And using these elementary strategies kind of sometimes makes our writing seem elementary. But there are sophisticated ways to do them. So don't completely throw them out. Just keep that in mind and take into account these new ideas I'm going to give you about introductions. So one other thing that we often have here is this idea of this inverted pyramid or inverted triangle, whatever you want to call it. The idea of starting broad and then going down specific into your thesis statement. And that is also kind of a very basic strategy, but it is one I find is a good framework for introductions. It's not the only framework, but it is one that I think can really be useful. It's one I still use, and you can put on a lot of things on top of that. Like if you wanted to use a hook, you could have a broad hook and start that way. If you wanted to do something more advanced, you can still, with your more advanced strategy, start broad and go specific. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit first. So let's start with a review of that idea of broad to specific. I'm calling it a review because I assume you've learned something like it before. You may not have learned my specific version. So this is actually what you're about to see. It's a presentation that I do with my CP students, because I kind of keep them at this level, this idea of going broad to specific. I keep them there. I don't push them any further than that. And you guys, I'm going to push further, but I'm still going to have you kind of use that possibly, if it helps you, as kind of a framework for the more advanced strategies I'm going to give you to put on top of it. So what this is, I can back up. It's so you can see. It's a long explanation about why that is. I made this in 2012, so like it was relevant then. Trust me. But introduction, body, and conclusion. So the idea is it's a bow tie shape. Like the introduction starts broad, kind of funnels people in from outside of the world of your paper, funnels them into the very specific details where your body is the most specific with specific quotes from the text. And then you expand outward to your conclusion. That starts by recapping the body paragraphs and then expands out and kind of leaves people with something to take out with them in the real world. It's kind of the flow of a paper. It is not the only flow of a paper, but it is one that's pretty tried and true and works pretty well. So this example is going to be about Romeo and Juliet. I assume most of you have read that, but if not, that's okay. You can still kind of get this idea here. So here is an example introduction. Okay, so I'll read it real quick and then I'll tell you kind of what I did. So the prompt here is, who do you think is responsible for Romeo and Juliet's death? Spoiler alert if you haven't read that. So whenever there's a real life tragedy, whether a heinous crime or horrific accident, it is human nature to cope with the situation by attempting to assign blame. The same is true of literature. In Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, the two title characters meet a tragic fate. Once their deaths are discovered, the prince focuses on assigning blame by saying, "Seal up the mouth of outrage for a while, till we can clear these ambiguities and know their spring, their head, their true descent." But who is to blame for Romeo and Juliet's death? In truth, Romeo and Juliet are responsible for their own deaths because they act quickly, selfishly, and secretly. So you can see this is not an AP essay. You can tell by the thesis statement, but it is a decent introduction for this concept. So here are the strategies I used to create it. That is the idea of going broad to specific that we can layer on top of more advanced strategies. So talking about the general topic is the first way to be broad. So again, my prompt was, who is responsible for Romeo and Juliet's death? And so what is the general topic then? Well, the general topic is blame, like blame for the deaths. So I start talking about tragedy and human nature to assign blame. So again, a very broad idea about blame. We're not into Romeo and Juliet's death yet. We're not into Romeo and Juliet at all. Then I narrow it down to literature and then specifically to Romeo and Juliet. So the next thing is introducing the text, which is something you should always have in any intro, advanced or basic. So talking about the general topic, funneling down to the specific text. Oops. Ooh. And then topic, text. What is happening? Okay, don't know what happened there, sorry. So the next, use facts or quotes that relate to your general topic. So in these two, introducing the text or using facts or quotes can be interchanged. Basically, this idea is something more specific, possibly to the text, or either to the text or to the topic, something more specific about that general topic. So I introduce the text and then I give a specific quote from the text about blame. Which is there. Now, this is not a quote. I want to use my body paragraphs. My body paragraphs are going to talk about why it's Romeo and Juliet's fault. This is just asking about blame. So this is not a good quote for me to use for the specific blaming of Romeo and Juliet, but it is a good quote to talk about blame in general. So using that specific quote and then ending in thesis. So it is kind of a 4-step strategy for going broad to specific. General topic, introducing the text, using a fact or quote, and when we're talking about literature, a quote to talk about that topic in the text, and then your thesis statement. Now we can layer in more advanced strategies on top of this. So, for instance, this thesis is not an AP thesis. So we could create a more advanced thesis. We can use some fancier things to talk about the general topic. Some more complex. We just talked about making complex thesis statements. So if our general topic were more about like power or something like that, that could be more advanced. But let's also think about another way to um, have some more advanced topics. So at this point, I want you to go watch the next video of another teacher who is going to talk about some advanced strategies. And I will say that sometimes these advanced strategies, and if you look at the introduction she creates, while she doesn't say she's going broad to specific, although she mentions that as a way to make introductions, she really is kind of using it. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but now go to that next video.